So today what we actually want to cover is we first want to give you an introduction to the Awell Marketplace. So we have quite some extensions available, and we want to go a little bit deeper on the categories that we support today and what you can actually expect from an extension and their custom actions that are tied to it. We actually then also want to talk about Awell extensions themselves, on how to actually access, install, and manage them. So this is where we dive into Awell Studio and clarify how you can actually activate them for your different care flows. And again, what type of configuration that you'll actually have to do and how you can maintain those. The third part of the presentation will focus on explicit use cases or some best practices on how you can leverage extensions in your existing workflows so you can streamline them, boost efficiency, and improve patient care, to then actually move on to the Q&A session. So the Q&A session will be the second part of this meeting. We do want to suggest that you post any questions that you have, post them in the chat, and we'll handle them at the very end. And with that, Raoul, I hand over the word to you to start with the introduction of the Awell Marketplace.
Thank you. So can you see that okay? Because now I can no longer see anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just a really quick overview of kind of the Awell ecosystem. So what we call the care journey is essentially something that is first built, validated, and published in our Studio app. Once published, it's kind of then within the orchestration domain. And what that means is that we execute the care flows against live patients, real patients. So each patient can have multiple care flows. And in the process of what we call orchestrating those care flows, we're interacting with lots of different applications. Now, those applications can be third-party applications, so essentially the tools that our customers use, and we can interact with those directly, whereas previously you might sort of say, we're going to take some information from you and then pass that on to our third-party tool, and then you are the go-between. With extensions, or in the world of extensions, or even just existing API call actions, you can interact with these third-party applications, but also, of course, your own systems. If you have your own patient records or your own internal messaging system, for example, or a patient app, we can interact with your system through the use of extensions. So the marketplace comes in with this interaction layer. So where our orchestration API, which runs the care flow, needs to go and essentially pull or push data out to your own applications or third-party applications. Obviously, there's a wide variety of use cases, and also, to address these specific use cases, whether it's in a specifically clinical or just in a very generic way, there are loads of third-party tools out there. Our platform addresses a number of clinical use cases through Careflow triggers. So what we're talking about here is, on the right-hand side, you can see a number of use cases, and on the left-hand side, what actually starts those, what triggers this flow. So if you want to start a onboarding for a new patient, what actually starts that flow? Now, that could be a manual trigger. So you tell us, hey, please include this patient in this care flow. But we also, through extension, support kind of two other mechanisms, webhooks and ADT feeds. ADT feeds, for those who aren't aware, exists in a number of different countries in the UK and US. It's quite well known, but these are admit, discharge, and transfer. And so this is kind of a unified network of alerts that go out with regards to a patient to let anyone who wants to know, who subscribes to these feeds, whether a patient has been admitted or discharged or transferred from their facility or their providers. Webhooks, again, are quite common with any kind of tooling, not in a clinical context, in any context, technology-wise. And so this is just a way of pushing information from an external system, could be yours, could be a tool's, to us to say, hey, here's some information, do what you want with it. For us, that would mean, okay, we're going to start a care flow using that information and kick off some work to be done clinically. Now, within the Awell sort of ecosystem, there's different levels of integration. If we're talking specifically about the idea of getting data in and out between your own proprietary tool applications or third-party tools. Baked into our system is the kind of fundamental technical sort of way of pushing data out or pulling data in, which is an API call. And those we support within the studio, both REST and GraphQL as different ways of creating those queries. And so there's a number of different use cases. There's a lot of flexibility with regards to making these calls, and there's some features that we're delivering, which I'll touch on in a second, to make it really, really flexible in terms of, and powerful in terms of how you can make these API calls, pretty much supporting any kind of complex authentication or whatnot. Then in the world of extensions, there's essentially two flavors. There's like the vast majority, which is of interest, which is the public extensions. And these are, you know, your EMRs like Healthy or Elation or Canvas, or just generic tools like Twilio, SendGrid, Mailgun, tools that are out there that have an API that allow you to essentially the equivalent of what you would write in an API call saying, hey, go send a message to this patient. You have an extension baked in. And a private extension is then where it's not for a public API, these are private APIs. Typically, these would be your own APIs that you want to expose and you want to run your own, or you want to run some complex logic within the extension in terms of, okay, when this extension action runs, I want to do a couple of things in one go. And we always do these things together. So I'm just going to simplify it by creating a single action to do those things. Now, if you're kind of wondering, what does this mean or what is an extension? We're going to go through some kind of concrete examples, and kind of only really because we put here regular API calls, you can kind of see public extensions and private extensions, or just extension in general, this kind of spicy API calls. The spiciness comes from the fact that they are essentially an API call, but with a bit of sugar put on top of it, or kind of spice. And the spice is making it really easy for someone to use it. So you can kind of see a little bit truncated at the bottom. But on the bottom left, you can see something. For those of you who aren't technical, you're like, what is this? Why do I want to know this? But on the bottom right, you start to see things that are a little bit more what you would see in any kind of health UI, which is something that's human readable, easy to understand, and that is more usable for a less technical user, maybe even a clinician. So they can kind of interact with third-party systems through a more familiar or more simple to understand UI. And that can be also a huge benefit of using an extension versus API calls. Again, benefit of building clinical workflows is that anyone can build them if it's truly no code. The marketplace today is, and I'm going to open this up, and I am not sure if you can still see. Can you see what I've opened up?
No, we only see the presentation.
Yeah, okay, thought as much. So sorry. So this is our marketplace site. And this is in our developer hub, or where you can find all our documentation about how our system works, how you can orchestrate it, all the technical information about our systems, essentially. Here we also list all of our extensions in different categories. And so you can have a look here and see not just what extensions there are, but also what are the actions available as you build your care flow. So these are the granular actions that you can add to your care flow to achieve various outcomes. So we have some general purpose ones like that, and like EMR integrations. The link will be in the slides that you'll get afterwards, so you can feel free to access it that way. So in terms of our marketplace. I just want to touch really quickly on things that are coming up. So right now, our marketplace addresses a number of needs. A lot of it has been shaped by working closely with our customers, but also looking at kind of what would fit really nicely with our existing, either things that we don't want to build in our own system that other people do better, and gaps like that, or where we believe we want to encourage customers to try things. So we are missing some categories, such as billing, and those are things that we're going to be building extensions for in the future ourselves that you can use. All these extensions are free of charge now, so you're welcome to use them if they're available. We also want to broaden existing categories. As you might know, there are a number of EHRs out there. We have a broader EHR strategy at Awell right now. And one of the things is that we want to make it really easy to integrate and work with EHRs through Awell, rather than sort of having to separately maintain a lot of that. As part of your flows, you kind of can directly create patients or update them, interact with them there. On that note, a lot of EHRs also use standards. FHIR is one of the most common for a number of EHRs, and if anyone has worked with FHIR, you know that it's while very standardized, it's also very complex. It can be very difficult to work with, particularly from a UI perspective. If from a technical perspective, fine, but for example, a patient resource in FHIR can be very complex. And so we want to make it really easy to work with these resources, not just in the context of extensions, but generally within the studio when you're designing a care flow. I mentioned webhooks as a way of starting care flows through extensions. So for example, if a patient is created in Healthy, we then want to start a care flow to start collecting some additional information about them, maybe check eligibility. Now, that's an example of a webhook. We want to make it more flexible so that different kinds of events can trigger care flows through extensions. And so we're working closely with customers who use our webhooks to continue building that out. And also for those who do use private extensions, a challenge there is kind of making it really easy to test private extensions rather than needing to deploy them. So that's something we're going to also continue working on. Really important point, we welcome new suggestions, whether it's, hey, we use this tool, or we think this tool is really cool. Can you check it out, see if it's something that works well as an extension? We're always happy to do that. And furthermore, if you are really keen, our extensions are actually open source and publicly available. So it's really simple to actually build an extension. Our goal is to get it down to essentially a day for you to build a simple extension. So you are also welcome to have a look at our repository and see if there's somewhere you can contribute. I'm going to quickly show you how you can access the extensions and manage them within the studio, and then hand back to Sana to show you how some of the use cases around extensions. So. Great. So I'll zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. Yep. So here I'm going to just create a care flow. And look at the extensions tab. So this is where we list all of the extensions. They all start in a disabled state. In order to enable an extension, you just need to configure it. So for example, cal.com, which is a scheduling and calendaring tool. I'm just going to set up an API key, and that is now enabled. Once you've set up the minimum required, what you'll also see is that there are a number of webhooks that are now available. So these are essentially events that happen in cal.com in that tool that then triggers a message to be sent to us that we can then use to do something in Awell. So start a care flow. So we could start a care flow when a booking is canceled, a booking is rescheduled, or a booking has been created in cal.com. Now, once I've got an extension enabled, if I go into a care flow, in any step, I will see in the list of actions, you've got the basic and advanced actions that we typically have. So here are the API calls that I showed earlier. but then we can also see that there are scheduling actions available. And with each action, there's also the ability to store data points that come back. So you can set up an appointment to be booked, and any of the data points that are returned by cal.com, for example, you book an appointment, there's maybe a booking ID, you might want to send that in a message to a provider and say, hey, just for your reference, here's a booking ID. You can store that and then use that later on in a care flow. So I'm not going to spoil too much of the cool use cases of extensions. I'm going to let Sana show you those. And so with that, I'll stop here and hand it back to Sana.
Thanks, Raul. Okido. So at this point, what I indeed wanted to clarify, so what we want to present is actually 6 tips on how you can leverage extensions in your care flow. So we've built out a couple of examples. So the very first one is you can trigger an Awell care flow when an external event has happened. And I'll show you this in a minute in the studio as well. But in essence, what could be like a very trivial use case is that a patient is created and healthy. This actually triggers a webhook being the patient is being created, and that actually directly hits Awell, after which we start up a care flow. And then it's up to you again to identify what that care flow design looks like. But so in essence, as Raul has already touched upon, there are several ways in which we can react to external events. So if we have a quick look, we see here that the healthy extension is enabled for this pre-consultation follow-up. So if we look at the webhooks, there are a ton of those. So we can listen to tasks being created and deleted, goals for the patient being updated, deleted, forms being completed, patient being updated. And so at the very bottom, we have our appointment created. And when a message is received on this endpoint, which is something we'll actually install on Healthy's end, then an Awell care flow is being triggered. And so just a very quick look maybe at the care flow design. So the very first thing what you actually have to do if you work with webhooks is pull in additional detail. So a webhook will actually contain very limited information, given that it's also not sent over a secure channel. It's not that we have to enter our API key to actually receive the webhook. The webhook will just come in and will give us the ID of the appointment. That is literally nothing for us to actually do something within a care flow. So the very first thing that we do after receiving that webhook is getting the details from Healthy by authenticating ourselves, given in the extension, we've put in the URL, we've put in our API key, so then at least we can authenticate or authorize with the external system and can retrieve the necessary data. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm using a data point. So this is, again, where Raul clarified, you could also perfectly do this via an API call, but then you have to manually write your code, insert all of your variables. Well, here I can just rely on the data points that are being inserted and pull in additional data points. So this appointment created appointment ID, I get that from the webhook. That's basically the only thing. So afterwards, what I'm interested in is I want to know the patient ID and I want to know that appointment date. So again, what we do here is only pulling in the information that is relevant for my care flow design. Because there's additional information I can pull in. I can pull in the appointment type ID, the type name, the contact type. For example, in case if I would want to send out different surveys or different messages to the patient and deviate identify different surveys for different patients, I could do that based on that additional information. But so right now I'm pulling in the appointment details and then the patient details as well. So I got the patient ID from getting the appointment details, and what I'm interested in is the first name, so I can address the patient in my communication. I want to know their email address, their phone number, and their primary provider ID. So what we do afterwards, actually, just so that you actually have the full use case, we want to send a pre-survey consultation. So 2 days before the appointment, I'm sending out the PHQ2. I do that via a chat message. So again, Healthy supports chat functionality. So I'm letting the patient know your appointment is coming up. Please navigate to this Awell hosted page and you're going to see some surveys there. So here, Awell offers a lot of flexibility and we're making a combination of chat messages via Healthy, but then actually using Awell form functionality. We could also ask the patient to fill out a form in Healthy, but then we don't have that fully calculated. So you always have the option to identify which resources you want to use. and what you then do thereafter. So it's the form and the calculation that is then actually being sent to that patient, and we do that with very little detail that actually came in from that initial trigger. I won't go further because actually I have 3 care flows and 6 use cases, so there's a bit of overlap. But so know that you can trigger an Awell care flow when an external event has happened to then identify what you want to do next with regards to that incoming data. Best practice number 2 is that you can start up an additional Awell care flow when necessary. So when your flow has been completed, for example, patient finalized an Awell onboarding flow and is now eligible for treatment X, and I want to start up care flow X, you can do that from an Awell care flow as well. So if we have a quick look at the care flows that are built out as an example, then those two are connected. So we have our onboarding flow. So here we gather information from the patient. So there's a welcome message, patient fills out some demographic information. So how you need to look at this is, for example, there's a big button that lives on your website where a patient can sign up for your services. So after they click on that button, an Awell hosted page is being generated. They walk through, they fill out their demographic information, fill out some contact information, even we do an age calculation. We present some surveys as well to actually then afterwards triage the patient and verify what we want to do. So here, what we've actually done is if the patient is older than 18 years old, we want to create a patient account in Healthy. But additionally, if the patient is actually well, so their PHQ-2 score is low, and again, this is an example, you can use any other methods to evaluate your patient with other surveys, other tools. Here we use a PHQ-2. So if they say, I'm actually doing well, plus they were actually also interested to sign up because they like our convenient telemedicine services, well, maybe I actually already want to enroll them immediately in a digital resources care flow. So from one care flow, you can start up another care flow and actually stack your different care flows together. So here, what we identify is this is a care flow definition ID, and I'm going to send some baseline data along as well. So what this does is easy structuring of your care flows, because maybe the care flow digital resources is one that I want to send at different moments in time and not just after the onboarding. It can also be reused if the patient filled it out later in their customer journey. And for that, I separate it into a separate care flow with its own actions, with its own resources, and that makes it easy to maintain. And I can just call that care flow whenever I need it. And here, in this case, once the patient has signed up and is interested in hearing more about those digital resources. And again, just to clarify how I've done that as well was maybe not very clear. So what I've done in this care flow is enable the Awell workflow extension. So let's just have a quick look at our marketplace. So as part of the Awell extension, you can actually start up a new care flow from a given care flow. You can update the patient, and that means update the patient profile. Like as part of an onboarding flow, you're capturing data. You want to pipe that to the patient profile. So that is possible. You can also stop a care flow. So at any given moment in time, if a patient meets certain conditions or identifies that they want to resign from your services, and you can stop a care flow, search a patient by patient code, or verify if a patient was already enrolled in a care flow before you actually start it up again. So this is not our full API that's exposed. That's actually the same is true for all of the other extensions that we support as well. Healthy, we have a very deep integration there, but if you look at their API documentation, we don't support everything just yet. So we also grow our extensions with our customers and the additional requests that come in so that we can really tie it to explicit use cases that you guys are working on and want to implement together with Awell. If we move forward to the third piece, so this is closing the loop and keeping your information central. So if we, again, think about that onboarding flow, once the flow is completed, patient is onboarded, account was created and healthy, your job is in essence done. But we do advise you, keep your information central and local. Push the data to where you want to use it or where you want people on your end to access it. You don't always want to open up Awell for the automated workflows or for the data that was captured. You can actually pipe it to the system that you want it to. So here, an example that we've provided is, for example, create a charting note. So a charting note is a type of clinical summary. And here again, this is a healthy example. So with Awell, you have the ability to actually push that data through. So an example is again here the pre-consultation flow. So after we actually have the patient fill out their PHQ-2 form, we calculate it. We also push actually those survey results to healthy. So again, through the UI, you can configure, this is my patient ID. I push it to a form, which is an Awell charting note. That's the placeholder. And this is the content actually that I want to present. So again, here as part of a charting note, you have the ability to insert variables, to create your own clinical summary and make it very easily readable for the people that will be interacting with the outcome of that data. And it just ensures that whatever is done on the Awell end, you pipe the data back to your EHR as part of your patient record, and everything is stored locally. Then moving over to number 4 is we do want to advise you as well to experiment with your care flow to then actually identify what sticks. And how do we do that? We do that again with Awell extensions. So let's say that you actually want to verify what type of messaging works well or what really motivates the patient to take actions. Well, you maybe want to tailor your communication or make the difference between instructions A and instructions B. So Raul touched already on the math extension before, and I'm going to switch back to Awell Studio. So as part of our digital resources, so we want to motivate the patient to actually watch the video. So we're going to either send them resources option number 1 or number 2 over chat message in Healthy. So what we do here is we generate a random number between 0 and 1. And so as an output of that, we get a generated number. And if the number equals 1, we're going to send resources version 1 versus number 2 actually to the patient. So here we know what we can expect because we only expect to get a 0 or a 1 out. But you can actually very easily, in that sense, split up your care flow and just verify what works best. Because afterwards, you can look at how many patients went actually through either of those 2 branches and what were their outcomes. So there are no surveys attached to this, so it's a very crystal clear example. But I think you can envision what you verify what messaging sticks or even what communication channel sticks as well. So moving forward with our last 2 ones, so here just wanted to clarify what Awell extensions do for you as well as that they your configuration ability and the maintenance of the care flows. So if you look on your left-hand side, so here you would create a patient via regular API call actions. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to get a token to actually then create a patient. So you see here, there are already 2 actions where you can actually simplify moving to a single action because the whole OAuth 2.0 mechanism is built in, for example, in the extensions. It's not really absolutely required for Healthy, but if we want to communicate, for example, with a Compass Medical, then the same authentication mechanism applies, and you first need to get the token to only afterwards actually perform the action against the external API. So it's really a lot easier to work with extensions, and also the fact, as Raul clarified a little bit before as well, that we can create everything through manually selecting the right inputs. I don't need a developer to actually create a patient in Healthy, while I might need a developer if I want to create a patient over a regular API call, because you have to tie so many things together. So with the pre-created custom actions, you get the flexibility via the input that we provide, meaning that we allow you to insert dynamic data points, we allow you to insert static data points. So dependent on what needs to be done in the external system, we've done all of the thinking for you. So as you can see here as well, as part of a chat message, you don't have to think what is required in order for the API call to work. as long as you fill out the mandatory information, such as the healthy patient ID, the provider ID as well, because the chat message will be sent in the name of the provider, and you give a message, then this whole thing will work just out of the box without needing to test your API call actions. And it also makes it, of course, just a lot easier for any clinical person to actually come in and for them to own the messaging that goes out to their patients. You don't have to rely on an engineer, because this is just regular input that would need to be provided through the UI. And then I'll move forward with the last bit that we wanted to clarify on the power of Awell of extensions, is that you can actually decide on the right communication channel for your different messages. It's not that if you work with Healthy as your EHR, or you work with Compass Medical as your EHR, that you're actually bound to those communications channels that they provide. So I can send a chat message with a survey via Healthy to let a patient know, please fill this out before your appointment. But if the patient does not take action, and after a delay of 2 days, or for example, 1 day before the date of her appointment, send them a reminder via SMS. It's time critical, it's urgent, and most probably SMS will actually work better than sending them another chat via Healthy to actually inform them there is still something pending for you. So you really have the option, if you go through the different extensions that are available as part of our communications category, you can decide where you leverage email, SMS, or your EHR to send messages to your patients. So the message that we want to bring here is that the choice is yours. There's a lot of flexibility in the system, and of course you have to use your own account credentials, but again, in this way, combine all of these different things and you can start experimenting, pushing data to where it needs to go, choosing the providers, the third-party providers as you see fit, start up Awell care flows to make sure that you have some structure in your tenants and react to external events when necessary. And so with this, we actually conclude our presentation that we had foreseen. And so what we actually wanted to do was actually move over to Q&A.